Hello everyone and welcome to the RSA. Can I just remind everyone before we kick off proceedings to make sure their mobile phones are switched off or switched to silent. And can I also offer a welcome to everyone who is viewing online, and to remind anyone who will be joining in the discussion on Twitter that the hashtag is the rather marvellous hashtag RSA Flourish tonight. It's my enormous pleasure to be able to introduce Professor Edmund Phelps, who will be speaking to us this evening. Professor Phelps is the Professor of Political Economy at Columbia University, where he's also the Director of the Center on Capitalism and Society. He is, of course, also the winner of the Nobel Prize for Economics, which he was awarded in 2006. Professor Phelps' work has long been about trying to put something of the human, the real human, back into our understanding of economics by looking at things like beliefs, value systems, deeper motivations, which many would feel much of the economics profession tends to overlook or ignore at their peril. The book he's here to speak to us about tonight is his latest work, Mass Flourishing. It's very much in line with that strand and those themes that he's been exploring throughout his career. The subheading, the subtitle, has a flavour of that. It's how grassroots innovation created jobs, challenge and change. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Edmund Phelps.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to introduce Mass Flourishing to you. My book is built around the modern economies that arose in the 19th century, first in Britain and America around 1820, later Germany and France, and that functioned well into the middle of the 20th century. At the time, in the 19th century, say, the world marveled at the sustained growth of productivity and wages that those economies achieved and transmitted to a degree to other economies through trade and capital flows. Other nations, of course, copied their new products and new methods. Yet the world realized that the prospering or flourishing achieved in the modern economies could not be so easily copied. It's safe to say that never before had sustained prospering or flourishing been in the reach of large and increasing numbers. Prior to the first modern economies, economic knowledge, hence productivity, was virtually stagnant, even in the economies that were the jewels of mercantile capitalism, say Spain or Holland. The concept of job satisfaction in those times, those pre-modern times, was unknown. The solitary shepherd, bored and isolated, for me, symbolizes that system. The mass prospering and the economy-wide productivity growth that came with it were brought by mass innovating, though the historians spoke only of resources, efficiencies, and increasing returns to scale. In Britain and America especially, there was a welter of innovations in products and methods, most never to be well known. So there was not just headline innovations. In the 1840s Britain, new companies were forming so fast that Parliament, wearying of issuing charters, passed the Joint Stock Act of 1844. In an 1858 lecture, Abraham Lincoln said of America that there was a perfect rage for the new, a rage that was rife among makers of products, not just users, which Lincoln probably mostly had in mind. Where did the ideas come from? The modern economy did not produce mass innovation through a succession of generally exogenous discoveries by scientists and navigators, as the German historical school thought, and the commercial applications of those discoveries by entrepreneurs, as Schumpeter said and added. The modern economies possess their own dynamism, by which I mean the desire, capacity, and scope to innovate. With this dynamism, they were capable, on a good day at any rate, of indigenous innovation, not just the exogenous innovation of the German historical school. The system of dynamism was more effective the more open it was to contributors down to the grassroots. And the modern economies were rather open to the grassroots. They saw a massive outbreak of tinkering, imagining, and experimenting. Human resources of initiative and imagination were extensively devoted to innovating, not just producing and trading. And this dynamism ran high to the middle of the 20th century. No wonder there was mass flourishing, and no wonder productivity growth was so fast. No economy before drew on the imagination of a wide range of the nation's minds. This dynamism, of course, required entrepreneurs and financiers, just as the sporadic innovations of the mercantile period did. Entrepreneurs were needed to judge how best to do a project, financiers to judge whether the new product or method would find adequate adoption. Yet dynamism further required innovators. Innovators were needed with the insight, imaginativeness, and vision to dream up new products that might well work and change practice. Yet the idea that business activity in a free market can always be depended on to possess the dynamism for indigenous innovation is a mistake. The right stuff is required. Innovators will often have to buck conventional thinking or break away from traditional ties. Innovations also require a social and political climate that accepts them despite the disruptions they cause. But was this modern economy good? Propaganda to the contrary notwithstanding, modern economies brought a range of material benefits, including increases in productivity and wages, better health and increased longevity, decreases in poverty and pauperism, and wider inclusion across the economic spectrum. The most radical impact of the new economies, I argue, was non-material. It changed the very nature of life and work where the modern economy took root. The new regimes of continual change created an infinite series of stimulating new challenges to overcome and new heights to scale, resulting in previously unseen possibilities for self-realization at all levels of society. The adventurous and exploratory spirit of these modern economies also affected the arts of the period, from music to painting to literature. I venture a chapter where I appeal to evidence from music and painting and fiction to show that life had changed radically between the 18th and the 19th century. This transformation depended on the development of institutions that enabled dynamism, including legal protections of various rights, law governing corporations and financial institutions. The real crux, though, and one not given enough weight until now, I believe, is the rise of modern values. The spread of modern, by which I mean the modern attitudes, precepts, and beliefs. These modern values can be roughly grouped under the headings of individualism, thinking and working for oneself, willingness to break from one's group, willing to break from convention, vitalism, relishing changes and overcoming obstacles, taking initiative, acting on the world, and self-expression, imagining and creating, demonstrating a unique insight by testing it, voyaging into the unknown in hopes of making a mark on the world. Perhaps it's useful to remark that these activities or aspirations are often said to be human rights. Human rights. So, the slow accretion of these modern values, the book argues, finally achieved the critical mass necessary to fuel the desire in individuals to innovate, to spur the capabilities required to innovate, and to boost the willingness of society to give wide scope for innovation. I would note that the prevalence of modern values may not be sufficient for dynamism. There may be countervailing values present in a society. Or opponents of innovation may stifle the expression of modern values through innovation. The book documents that the modern values that I was just talking about arose with the onset of what Jacques Barzun called the modern era, roughly from 1490 to 1940, from the late Renaissance through the Enlightenment and then some. May I have slide 6, please? There we go. The book argues that these modern values paralleled the elements in the modern conception of the good life, the basic concept of which started with Aristotle. There was Pico, Luther, Montaigne, Cervantes, Shakespeare, Hume, Hegel, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, William James, Bergson. Philosophers and humanists used the word flourishing to characterize this substance of the good life, as distinct from what the concept is. The sort of prospering that came to the economies of dynamism, the modern economies, is a specimen of the flourishing that the philosophers and humanists were talking about between the 1490s and well into the 20th century. In these terms, my thesis is that modern values stir a desire to flourish. In a nation where they prevail, they tend to generate an economy that offers an economic life that gratifies those desires, a life of flourishing. And the book submits this thesis to some statistical testing, which won't hurt too much, which I will touch on below. Of course, this philosophical heritage of the good life belonged to the world, and certainly to all of the Western nations. But it's implicit in the book's thesis that some of the nations did not embrace it strongly enough to incorporate it into their values, into the ones that they acted on a daily basis. Then, with time, reactions set in to the modern economy. The fluctuations and disparities in outcomes and even in prospects, typical of modern economies, caused a socialist reaction to those economies, leading in some nations to the construction of alternative systems and dogma. Some nations moved part of the way toward a socialist economy, seeing more planning and more extensive state ownership as a step on the way to stability and equality. Generally speaking, the socialists thought that the greater development of people's capacity to produce generally speaking, the socialists sought the greater development of people's capacities to produce, but showed no consideration or awareness of the deeper goals of individuals, the non-material rewards deriving from a life of self-expression, such as exploration and creativity. The socialists gave little thought to providing for innovation. The rudderlessness and the social upset wrought by the modern economies caused a corporatist reaction having overtones of the traditional values found in the Middle Ages and even in the mercantile capitalism of later centuries. Corporatists hated new enterprises invading towns. They hated new money, upsetting traditional ways, wealth, and status. And there was a profound revolt against individualism and self-expression. The corporatists erected institutions and adopted policies aimed at coordination across the economy, social protection, and significant control over some industries. These corporatist economies were also conspicuous for their patronage and lobbying, not to mention cronyism and nepotism. In other words, for going outside the market. They promised to produce innovation. Mussolini was very firm about that, but they made little provision for it. While corporatists and socialists claim that their systems would boost economic performance on their measures, the data show otherwise, even in terms of participation and stability and productivity, where they thought that they were going to outstrip modern capitalism without any doubt. As it turned out, these economies were so woefully lacking in innovation, indigenous or even exogenous, that they were unable to realize their own goals relative to the modern economies. The thesis is tested in my book by using the prevalence of certain values reported in household surveys to represent the strength of modern values. Like, when you look for a job, do you look for a job that's interesting? When you look for a job, do you look for a job that will allow you initiative? That kind of thing. And the statistical test uses job satisfaction as a measure of flourishing. If my thesis is right, we should expect that a population subscribing to modern values will forge careers and seek jobs that are interesting, involve initiative, offer change, and present challenges, such as competition. The statistical finding is that nations scoring strongly in modern attitudes do tend to score high in job satisfaction. They develop economies with enough dynamism to generate the jobs and careers that will enable them to flourish. I keep trying to rewrite that sentence. Take two is, in nations where modern values prevail, the economy evolves into a modern shape to deliver the jobs that participants want, the jobs that they say are satisfying. Nations where values are prevailingly traditional are stuck with corporatist economies and tend to report mediocre or poor job satisfaction. Unfortunately, by the early 1970s, evidence of a deterioration in the functioning of the modern economies was undeniable. In Britain and Germany, later France, the damage to indigenous innovation, to dynamism, appears to have been severe, though concealed for a long time by continuing technological transfers from America as long as the supply lasted, which was until the late 1990s. In America, growth of productivity also declined sharply in the early 1970s. Growth of productivity was almost halved, cut in half, between the period 1922 and 1972 and the period 1973 to 2012. In all of these nations, unemployment expanded and previous gains in inclusion were lost. Apparently, indigenous innovation had sagged, dragging job satisfaction down with it, not only in America, but across all the once dynamic nations. Now, what happened? Well, this is the most difficult part of the book because it's all very new. We don't have a great deal of evidence. I convey now to you some speculations. Many factors, I think, contributed to the decline of dynamism and innovation. One was a new short-termism in corporate management. Another was failures of judgment in the banking industry and in government policy. There was a revived materialism and sense of entitlement across the culture. What may be most important is that modern values, while they may have been holding up, came to be hamstrung by a resurgency of traditional anti-modern values. I suggest that a new corporatism came to America. In this new corporatism, companies are less interested in innovation than in rent-seeking. Elites in government play a large role in influencing the directions of a nation's attempts at innovating. And those who would like to try to develop their own ideas must overcome the pull of family and friends and the increased prestige of other sorts of lives. By focusing on material objectives, conventional partisans of both corporatism and capitalism, this is a sort of a plague on both your houses paragraph, are missing the point. The point that it is the non-material rewards of the modern economy, the good life that it makes possible, that are the distinctive gift of the modern economy to societies. A good economy, in this sense, is not one that assures a certain... a good economy is one that permits and fosters the good life, the life of flourishing for its participants. John Rawls remarks somewhere about how an economy that has gross inefficiencies, even if it appears just on the surface, can't be just if it's tolerating such inefficiencies, because everybody's worse off than they could be. That's not just. Similarly, if nobody is having a good life, even though on the surface the economy appears to be perfectly just, it's not really a good economy. Of course, in order to be just, a good economy must provide opportunities for the good life to those who aspire to it. A modern capitalist economy, when it is functioning well and justly and buttressed by modern values through the population, is justified. Of course, if the good economy had to be unjust for some reason, then that would give us pause. In order to regain the West's past glory and to resuscitate the good economy, widespread indigenous innovation and grassroots dynamism must be restored. Institutional and policy fixes can help, but the economy is not a machine that can be cranked up or down at will. It is a living, organic entity composed of all those individuals who participate in it and their ideas and culture. The mix of modern values that first brought forth the modern economies must be reaffirmed and strengthened if the nations of the West are to have a future of mass flourishing.
Thank you very much, Professor Phelps, for that extremely interesting lecture. Before I open up to wider questions from the floor, I suppose one question which interests me is to ask you exactly what you think about is the relationship between the free market and innovation, because you were clearly deeply critical of socialist and corporatist strands. But many people would argue that the free market in its sort of pure, unlimited form can be deeply hostile to innovation and grassroots innovation, that it can tend to promote monopoly and oligopoly. It can create high levels of deprivation, which can militate against innovation. And of course, as you mentioned, it can lead to highly speculative investment rather than investment in sort of long-term innovation. So I just wonder what your feelings are about the free market as a promoter of innovation, grassroots innovation.
I'm a little unsure what you mean by free market, and maybe in my own mind, I haven't decided what I mean by the free market. Is anybody really sure what the word means? I don't think of my book as in any way allied with a free market philosophy such as, let's say, libertarians might and do advocate. First of all, I made very clear that even the most sparkling institutions of the capitalist type or any other type are not sufficient for an economy of dynamism. There have to be the right values, the right attitudes, the right stuff. Now, would I nonetheless see a libertarian persuasion as favorable to dynamism and hence innovation? not necessarily. There are a lot of unresolved issues out there that that bear on the issue. Like, for example, some people in Sweden will argue that they can afford to be cutting edge. They consider themselves a little bit cutting edge. I don't know how much truth there is in that. But they say they can afford to be cutting edge because business people know that if they fail, they've got a safety net to fall back into. So that you can't say that the Swedes say you can't say that their safety net is anti-innovation. But in any case, we can certainly have an economy that's highly dynamic, highly innovative, and at the same time have a reasonable level of entitlements. Of the character with which we are familiar. And of course it goes without saying that a government can have programs of social assistance to mitigate poverty and indigence. I think the issue is really, I don't want to take up more time on this particular question, but I think the issue is really not how large a government we want to have. It's really what goals we want the government to pursue. And I would like the government in my country to become much more dedicated to education and to spend tons of money experimenting until we can see what's necessary, what works to do a much better job of educating our children. And I also have strongly felt for years and years and years, as expressed in my book, Rewarding Work, that economic justice demands subsidies to companies for their employment of low-wage workers as the best available device for pulling up employment and pulling up wages of low-wage people. It's important to draw people, draw adults into the business sector so that children will grow up with some sense of a life of enterprise, a life of creativity, if you will, imagination. And that's not happening in America now because there's such a sort of a two-America phenomenon, a huge number of males in prison and a huge number of females who are sort of professionally raising children without themselves being integrated into the business world.
Okay, thank you. I will open up to the floor for questions. We have microphones, so please wait for the microphone before asking your question. So could I see, I'll take a couple of questions, 2 or 3 questions at a time. So, yep, the lady here in the second row. Go ahead, yep.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the talk. I wondered if you might speculate a little bit on what emerging economies could do to help or encourage the idea of dynamism, considering obviously the situation that we're in socially. Personally, I'm Colombian, and obviously we come from a country that has a lot of internal conflict, but we realize that innovation and getting to the grassroots and having this idea...
You're thinking in particular of countries with having a lot of conflicts?
Yes, yes, right. That would be great, because it
so
is...
2 strikes against them. First, they're only emerging, and secondly, on top of that,
exactly.
they have conflicts. Okay, I'll do the best I can.
Thank you.
There's a lady over there in the red there who had a question.
Thank you. That was very interesting, and I was particularly interested in the idea that our values had changed as a result of modern economies, and that circle of changing values and the changing economy.
Can you speak a little bit louder? I'm sorry.
The thing about a change in values is it is a change in values, isn't it? So the modern values, including things like an interest in job satisfaction, will be very different from older values where things like equanimity in the face of adverse life fortunes would have been valued. So I'm just wondering whether you can really say that modern economies offer a better life, or just that we value different things in them.
Thank you. Interesting question. And I'll take one more as well. Yeah, the gentleman here. Second one from the back.
What countries do you see as leading the way in modern values, and how did they get there?
Okay, thank you.
What countries do I see as leading the way?
Yeah,
Okay.
in dynamism and modern values.
Shall we
Yeah,
make this
please go
up?
ahead, yeah.
Well, on the surface, the book has nothing to say about emerging market economies. It's its data set is a very spare data set. Even Italy has to go for many pages without getting a mention until finally it gets in. Mussolini brings Italy into the picture, but then when Mussolini is gone, Italy sinks from view again. So I mean, one might think, oh, well, this dynamism thing is way out of reach of an emerging market economy. They can't flourish. They're not to first base yet, to use a baseball simile, which I suppose works for cricket, but I don't know. But of course, to say that would be an exaggeration, wouldn't it? I mean, there are degrees, and even an emerging market economy, I should think, could have pockets of dynamism. I think of the aircraft industry in Brazil. So I think yes, I think emerging markets can have a degree of flourishing, but almost by definition, the highest level of development corresponds to a high level of flourishing. Now you bring in conflict. I don't know what kind of conflicts you have in mind. Of course, right now we have in the United States, we have some conflict between modern values and traditional values. It's really, I think, worth resuscitating a paragraph here from the Outbasket, which is very fat. I have a little section here which I didn't begin to have time to read to you on the new movement against flourishing. I'm having a lot of fun with this one. And I noticed that John Dewey in the 1920s, very famous American philosopher, talks about problem solving. But, it's such a mechanical thing and such a lifeless description. He seems not to have read Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, or even William James. He just doesn't convey a life of exploration, and it's kind of sad. And that's in the 1920s in America. And then Abraham Maslow, in another classic piece in 1943, writes of self-actualization like we're some sort of a machine, and if we're lucky, we get all the kinks and all the malfunctions out of this machine, and then it's operating fully. But this is such an undynamic view of a full life, of a life of dynamism, of a life of richness. Well, maybe that all seems esoteric and beside the point, but now I think that a reversion to materialist thinking, a reversion back to materialist thinking, away from modern thinking with its emphasis on non-material rewards, is found even at high levels. I wonder whether you've heard of the 2009 report of the Commission on the Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress. I could ask for a show of hands, but well, it devalues one materialist measure. This is the Stiglitz Commission, in which some of my closest friends participate, so I have to watch my words. Including Joe Stiglitz. It devalues one materialist measure, namely production, or GDP. But then in the next breath, it upholds other measures of material well-being. Household wealth and income. Yes, you can check it. You can go to the website of the OECD to confirm that. They're talking about wealth and income. I mean, I was a little bit shocked. I mean, such a high-level group should have at least made a nod toward the good life. Another one is time away from work. Well, wait a minute. Work is, in this world of ours, work is the source of the challenges and the opportunities that we have. What are they talking about anyway? I don't understand it. And then they throw in longevity, which I think is another material thing. There's nothing existential about it, I don't think, or experiential. It's just the number of years you got to enjoy all that wealth and income. So I think these formulations overlook the world of creation, exploration, and personal growth. Gone is the conception of the good life as a wild ride through an economy with an open future, an economy offering challenges with unimagined rewards. In this climate, young people are not likely to grow up conceiving the good life as a life of Kierkegaardian mystery, Nietzschean challenge, and Bergsonian becoming. So I'm very worried about what's going to happen to flourishing. Now,
could I just pick up on one of the questions that came through, which is about the countries that you see as leading the way now? Because clearly, in the book, at one stage, you felt the West was at the heart of modern values and innovation and dynamism. Is there anywhere in the world now that you see as the sort of hope for the modern good life that you envision?
I would be willing to bet that, given enough time, maybe a generation, maybe 2 generations at the outside, China will be full not just of entrepreneurs of a kind of a timid, mechanical kind who seize the opportunity for $5 bills that have been left on the sidewalk. Old joke, economist joke. But innovative people who have ideas that nobody's ever had before, imaginative ideas. I think Chinese people want to go in that direction, but it's hard for them because they were brought up to be not to rock the boat, not to break from convention, and not to stand apart from the group. But I think they know that about themselves. The awareness is there, so I think that change is on the way.
But I assume,
could I just
go ahead.
answer this question from the lady in the last column? I know it seems like sort of tautological. I take a modernist conception of the good life and then I praise the economy that delivers the good life as good, and then we're done. But to say that, well, why don't you just say that traditional values are fine, and an economy that serves those traditional values, a traditional economy, that's fine too. And so some countries are going to want one, and some countries are going to want the other. I don't like that, what I guess, cultural relativism. I think at some fundamental level, human beings are pretty much alike, and that most human beings resonate with the modern conception of what the substance of a good life is. And they would like to have it for them. They admire it in others. They'd like to have it for themselves. They hope, and many people hope that their children will be able to have that kind of a life too. I don't accept that one set of values is, maybe putting words in your mouth, but I don't accept that one set of values is as good as another. I know a lot of anthropologists were relativists within the years of my education in the 1950s, but some anthropologists, such as Ruth Benedict, broke with that. And I don't think you see that relativism around much anymore.
Thank you.
Can capitalism deliver on good value, on what you call good life, with small government? Or does capitalism, to deliver the good life, it requires a big government? In other words, do we need to regulate capitalism? Is that the way towards getting to good life? Or leave it alone and manage with the small governments? Thank you.
Thank you. I think if I
take a couple more questions, if that's all right.
let me try to go, if you don't mind. For a modern economy, for an economy of dynamism, or whether there might be some alternative route to it. No?
I think whether capitalism needs to be managed in some way to deliver the good life, or can capitalism left alone deliver the good life, I think was the thrust of the question. Oh.
Well, my thesis is that somebody's got to be tending the values. Somebody's got to be tending education. There has to be a spirit of exploration and experiment and discovery, a spirit of pioneering. And if that isn't there, then you get something like the mercantile capitalism of the 15th, 16th, of the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. But some sea root or some exotic foodstuff was found, but there wasn't any indigenous innovation in the economy. People were not busy inventing new methods, and hang up the spikes and stop. Been there, done that, move on to something else, like reflection or
individual themselves, but for the next generation, that as the children kind of coming through, there's not the same drive to innovate if they have all of the kind of, you know, the material things that they need, so that you kind of, I guess that comes back to your point of education and needing to keep stimulating the next generation to go out and pursue that.
Well, I've read Buddenbrooks, I understand, and the Thomas Mann novel, First Generation is business, great, and the second generation is some loftier level, but maybe a little more boring. And then the third level, I've forgotten what it is, but it's totally boring. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I do have a sense that America became so accustomed to dynamism and some approximation of the good life in its modern version, that people forgot. There was a terrible unawareness of how valuable that was, and people stopped celebrating it and stopped defending it, and people took it for granted until it just kind of has withered away. Mm.
Okay, I think we've got time for one and maybe two one question and one more, maybe a very short one. Yes, gentleman here. Yeah.
Thank you. I enjoyed your presentation very much, and I concur, I think, with much of what I understand, but I am having trouble with the semantics you're using and the jumping around from different semantic groups. To focus on the word flourish, it isn't a steady state word. And if markets move toward an equilibrium, then there's a fundamental tension you're describing between the flourishing and then the market's push toward an equilibrium state.
Okay. Well, thanks for that thoughtful question, but in my mind, flourishing is certainly not a steady state concept. It's a growing thing. So
the organic
so the
model.
flourishing, of course, needs continuing nutrients,
Education,
and not to mention enabling institutions and all that. So the flourishing will stop the moment people stop wanting to try to develop new things, new methods. When there's nowhere, anywhere, people dreaming up new things, new things to try to develop and try to market. So yes, it's not like some sort of a steady growth state or some sort of frictionless thing where once you get the ball rolling, well, it'll just go on forever. It's nothing at all like that. So we will only flourish as long as we individuals will only flourish as long as we keep on reinventing what we want to do, what we want to try out, what we want to look at, where we want to explore, and so forth.
We've got time for one very quick question. The gentleman there who's been very keen to ask a question. Can you keep it as brief as possible, please? Thank you.
Building on Schumpeter's creative destruction, do you think part of the problem is that when the time comes, we actually bail out the system, and that's what we're never going through that process of creative destruction?
I think the problem, you said, do you use the phrase bail out, that we bail out the system instead of allowing sort of Schumpeterian creative destruction to continue, we try and save the system from itself by bailing it out rather than letting innovation reflourish.
Or some sort of Hayekian purge and catharsis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not exactly sure what examples or what the particularities are that you have in mind, but I do see that, I do feel that there's too much wealth slushing around in the economy. People have become fat and bloated, both in terms of private wealth. After the growth stopped, people kept on saving and saving and saving and saving and having one house and then two houses and then three houses. And in Italy, then they have the one boat, the two boats, and the flat in Paris. And then there's the social wealth, all these entitlements. And pension promises that probably can't even be delivered. So it's as if the government was conspiring to make it all the harder, all the less likely that a young generation will spring up that wants to, as Horace Greeley said, go west, young man. Yes, I do think the sort of the energy of the system has somehow run down, but I continue to believe that the most fundamental thing needing to be done is to celebrate and revive and rejuvenate the modern values and make explicit the good life that made a whole lot of people very excited with their lives.
Thank you. Well, I'm aside, and Professor Phelps has very kindly agreed to stay for a while and talk more, and by joining me in thanking Professor